The massive space station called Nexus Prime floated in the dark void between three star systems. Its metal walls stretched for miles in every direction. Lights blinked along its surface like tiny stars. Inside the station, the most important meeting in the galaxy was about to begin. Jake Morrison walked down the long hallway toward the council chamber. His black suit was perfectly pressed. His brown hair was combed neat. He carried a small leather folder under his arm. Jake had been Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council for 3 years now. Everyone knew him as the quiet human who always said please and thank you. The council chamber was huge. 12 different seats sat around a circular table. Each seat was built for a different alien species. Some were tall, some were wide, some needed water, some needed special air to breathe. Above the table, a large dome showed the stars outside. Jake took his place at the human seat. It was smaller than most others. The humans were still new to the council. They had only joined 5 years ago. Most aliens still thought of humans as the baby species who needed to be taught how things worked. Commander Vex Thornscale entered the chamber first. He was a Zenthari, which meant he looked like a giant lizard that walked on 2 legs. His scales were dark green and his eyes were yellow. He was 8 feet tall and had sharp teeth. Vex carried himself like a soldier. He had been a warrior before. He became a politician. Next came Tide Singer Koralesh from the ocean world of Merhai. She floated in a tank of blue water that moved with her. Her skin was pale blue and covered in patterns that glowed softly. She had no legs, just a long tail like a fish. Her voice sounded like singing when she spoke. The insect-like Crics delegate arrived third. His name was Hive Voice Zakth. He looked like a praying mantis the size of a man. His green shell was hard and shiny. His compound eyes could see in all directions at once. When he spoke, it sounded like clicking and buzzing. Other delegates filled their seats one by one. The rock people called Granite Kin, the gas beings who lived in special suits, the cat-like feral who had claws and fangs, the bird people who had wings instead of arms. Each species was different. Each one was older than humanity. Each one thought they knew better than the humans. Jake nodded politely to each delegate as they arrived. He smiled his small, diplomatic smile. Some aliens nodded back. Others ignored him completely. Jake had grown used to this treatment. Humans were seen as soft, weak, too new to understand real politics. The session began with small matters. Trade routes between systems, mining rights on empty planets. Jake listened quietly and took notes in his neat handwriting. He never interrupted. He never raised his voice. When other delegates spoke over each other, Jake waited patiently for his turn. Commander Thornscale stood up after the first hour. His large claws clicked on the metal table. "I have an important proposal," he said in his deep, growling voice. "It concerns the expansion of various species into new sectors." Jake looked up from his notes. Expansion meant new colonies. New planets for people to live on. Humanity had been asking for permission to expand for 2 years now. Their home system was getting crowded. Thornscale activated the holographic display above the table. A map of local space appeared. Red lines showed current borders. Green areas showed empty space that could be claimed. Jake could see 3 sectors that humans had requested. They were marked in blue. "The Council has reviewed all expansion requests," Thornscale continued. "We must consider the safety of all species. Some newer members of the Council may not understand the dangers of rapid expansion." Jake felt his stomach tighten slightly. Thornscale was talking about humans. Everyone knew it. But the commander continued without saying it directly. "Therefore, I propose we limit expansion in sectors 7, 12, and 15. These areas have unique challenges that require experienced leadership." The sectors Thornscale mentioned were exactly the ones humans had requested. Jake's pen stopped moving across his paper. He looked up at the commander with his polite smile still in place. Tide Singer Koralesh spoke next. Her voice was musical, but her words were sharp. "The Merhai support this proposal. We have observed concerning patterns in human expansion. They spread quickly and change environments to suit their needs. This could damage delicate ecosystems. Hive voice Zach clicked his agreement. The Crics Collective agrees. Biological contamination is a serious concern. Human bacteria and viruses could harm native life forms. We must be careful. More voices joined in. The rock people worried about mining damage. The gas beings worried about atmospheric changes. The cat people worried about hunting disruptions. One by one, each species found a reason why humans should not be allowed to expand. Jake listened to each concern. He nodded understanding. He made notes. His expression never changed from polite attention. Inside, however, something cold was growing. These were not random concerns. This was planned. The debate continued for another hour. Delegate after delegate stood up to support Thornscale's proposal. They used careful language and diplomatic terms, but the message was clear. Humans would be boxed into their current space. No new colonies, no new worlds, no growth. Jake noticed how smoothly it all went, how each species had their arguments ready, how they never looked at him while they spoke. This was not a discussion. This was a performance. They had already decided. They were just going through the motions of democracy. When the last delegate finished speaking, Thornscale looked at Jake with what might have been a smile. It was hard to tell with a lizard face. Ambassador Morrison, would you like to respond to these concerns? Jake stood up slowly. He looked around the chamber at all the alien faces watching him. Some looked smug. Others looked bored. A few looked almost apologetic. None of them looked like they expected anything important from the small human in the black suit. Thank you, Commander Thornscale, Jake said in his quiet voice. These are indeed serious concerns. I would like to request a brief recess to consult with my government before responding. Several delegates exchanged looks. Some smiled. They thought Jake was going to call Earth and ask for permission to surrender. They thought he would come back with a gracious speech about understanding their concerns and accepting their wisdom. Of course, Thornscale said with obvious satisfaction. Take all the time you need, Ambassador. We understand this is a complex issue. Jake gathered his papers neatly. He placed them in his folder with careful movements. He straightened his tie and smoothed his jacket. Then he walked out of the chamber with the same quiet dignity he had entered with. Behind him, the alien delegates began talking among themselves. Their voices were relaxed and confident. They thought the humans would do what they always did. Smile politely, accept whatever they were given, be grateful for small mercies. They had no idea that Jake Morrison was about to make a phone call that would change everything. They had no idea that the polite, quiet human they had just dismissed was about to show them what humans were really like when the diplomatic mask came off. The recess began. In 30 minutes, the Galactic Council would learn the difference between human politeness and human weakness. They would discover that the two things were not the same thing at all. Jake walked quickly through the metal corridors of Nexus Prime. His footsteps echoed in the empty hallway. Other diplomats and staff members stepped aside as he passed. They had never seen the quiet human ambassador move with such purpose before. The human diplomatic suite was located in the outer ring of the station. It was smaller than most other embassy spaces. The walls were painted white and decorated with pictures of Earth, a blue and green planet that looked peaceful from space. Jake's hands were shaking slightly as he used his key card to open the door. Inside the suite, two people were waiting for him. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Park sat behind a desk covered with computer screens. She was a small woman with black hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her uniform was navy blue with silver buttons. Lisa had been Jake's aide for 2 years. She handled communications and kept track of all the boring paperwork that diplomacy required. Captain Rex Hamilton stood by the window looking out at the stars. He was a big man with short gray hair and scars on his hands. His uniform was different from Lisa's. It was black with red patches that marked him as Earth Defense Corps Intelligence Division. Rex had arrived on the station 3 days ago. Officially, he was there for a routine security review. Unofficially, he was there because Earth suspected something was wrong. Jake closed the door behind him and turned the lock. The click sounded very loud in the quiet room. "How bad was it?" Lisa asked without looking up from her screens. "Worse than we thought," Jake replied. He loosened his tie and sat down heavily in a chair. "They're not even trying to hide it anymore. Thornscale basically told the entire council that humans are too stupid and dangerous to be trusted with new colonies." Rex turned away from the window. His face was grim. "Then it's time you saw what we've been working on." Rex walked to a secure briefcase sitting on the table. He pressed his thumb against a scanner and typed in a code. The case opened with a soft beep. Inside were data tablets, printed reports, and photographs. Rex spread them across the table like cards in a poker game. "We've been watching the Zenthari for 6 months," Rex said. "Every communication they thought was private. Every ship movement they thought was secret. Every meeting they thought was secure." Jake picked up one of the photographs. It showed Zenthari warships gathered around a space dock. The ships were painted in dark colors and covered with weapon pods. There were dozens of them. "This was taken 2 weeks ago," Rex explained. "The Zenthari have been building a battle fleet, not for defense, for invasion. They've positioned ships around every human colony and trade route." Lisa handed Jake a data tablet. "Here are the communication intercepts. The Zenthari aren't working alone. They've been coordinating with the Crics and 3 smaller species. They've been planning this for months." Jake scrolled through the messages on the tablet. The words were in Zenthari script, but the computer had translated them into English. What he read made his blood run cold. The messages talked about the human problem and the need for a final solution. They discussed human colonies like they were tumors that needed to be cut out. They made jokes about how easy it would be to trick the naive humans into giving up their rights. "There's more," Rex said quietly. He handed Jake another tablet. "We found out about the Crics research station." The tablet showed intelligence reports about a secret facility on a planet called Kepler 442b. The Crics had built a research station there 6 months ago. They claimed it was for studying plant life, but that was a lie. The real purpose of the station was to study humans, living humans. The Crics had been capturing human colonists from remote settlements. They were running experiments on them, trying to find ways to create diseases that would only kill humans, trying to understand human psychology so they could break human minds. 37 humans had disappeared over the past year. Men, women, and children from the outer colonies. Their families thought they had died in accidents or gotten lost in space. The truth was much worse. They had been kidnapped and taken to the Crics facility for experiments. Jake stared at the reports for a long time. His hands had stopped shaking. Lisa noticed this and felt worried. Jake always had a slight tremor when he was nervous or stressed. She had never seen his hands completely steady before. "How many of them are still alive?" Jake asked. "Unknown," Rex replied. "The facility is heavily guarded. We haven't been able to get close enough for detailed scans." Jake set down the tablet and looked at both of his companions. When he spoke, his voice was different. The gentle, diplomatic tone was gone. In its place was something harder and colder. "Lisa, send an encrypted message to Admiral Scott Davis at Fleet Command. Priority Alpha. Tell him the Council has shown their true intentions. Request immediate deployment of Task Force Prometheus to Sector 7. Full combat readiness." Lisa's eyes widened. "Sir, that's 3 heavy cruisers and a dreadnought. If the Council sees that kind of firepower moving toward their space, they'll consider it an act of war." Jake's smile was nothing like his usual diplomatic expression. It was sharp and dangerous. "Good. Let them think about war for a while. Maybe it will help them understand what they're really dealing with." Rex was watching Jake carefully. He had served in military intelligence for 20 years. He had seen officers transform under pressure before. But this was different. Jake wasn't becoming angry or panicked. He was becoming something much more frightening. He was becoming calm. "What about the Crics facility?" Rex asked. "How long would it take our special forces to reach Kepler 442b? 18 hours if we use the new stealth ships." "Send them. Full assault team. I want that facility completely destroyed and every human prisoner recovered. I don't care how many Crics die in the process." Lisa was typing rapidly on her keyboard, sending encrypted messages to Earth. "Sir, are you sure about this? Once we start military operations, there's no going back to diplomacy." Jake stood up and walked to the window. Outside, he could see the lights of alien ships docked at the station. For 3 years, he had worked to build relationships with these species. He had attended their parties and learned their customs. He had treated them with respect and courtesy even when they treated him like a child. "Lisa, do you know why humans are good at diplomacy?" Jake asked without turning around. "Because we're naturally peaceful?" "No. Because we know what war really looks like. Every other species in this galaxy fights wars like games. They have rules and honor codes and traditional ways of doing things. Humans fight wars like we're trying to completely destroy our enemies." "Because that's exactly what we're trying to do." Jake turned back to face his two companions. The change in him was complete now. The nervous diplomat was gone. In his place stood something that reminded Rex of the officers he had served with during humanity's darkest conflicts. The aliens in that council chamber think they understand humans because they've seen us being polite. They think politeness means weakness. They're about to learn the difference. Rex began packing up the intelligence reports. "What do you want me to tell Admiral Davis about rules of engagement?" "Tell him there are no rules. The aliens started a war when they began experimenting on human civilians. Now they get to see how humans actually fight wars." Jake straightened his tie and smoothed his jacket. In a few minutes he would return to the council chamber. He would sit in his small chair and listen to more alien speeches about why humans couldn't be trusted with expansion rights. But this time would be different. This time Jake would not be the polite diplomat trying to make friends with species that saw humans as inferior. This time, he would be what he had always been underneath the diplomatic mask. He would be human. And the aliens were about to discover that humans had been holding back for 3 years. They were about to learn what happened when humans stopped being polite and started being honest. Jake walked back into the council chamber exactly 30 minutes after he had left. The alien delegates were still talking among themselves in small groups. Their voices were relaxed and cheerful. Some were even laughing. They expected the human to return with his tail between his legs, ready to accept whatever scraps they decided to throw him. But something was different about Jake Morrison now. His posture had changed completely. Instead of the slightly hunched shoulders of a nervous diplomat, he stood perfectly straight like a soldier at attention. His hands no longer fidgeted with papers or trembled slightly. They hung at his sides, perfectly still and calm. The aliens noticed the change immediately, though they didn't understand what it meant. Jake no longer smiled his polite diplomatic smile. His face was blank and cold. His eyes moved around the chamber in a new way, like he was counting enemies instead of looking for friends. Commander Thornscale called the session back to order. His yellow eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he looked at the human ambassador. "Welcome back, Ambassador Morrison. Have you had time to discuss our proposal with your government?" "Yes," Jake replied. His voice was different too. It had dropped, lower and become harder. The gentle asking tone was gone. Now he sounded like someone who was used to giving orders and having them obeyed. "Excellent," Thornscale said. "I'm sure Earth understands our concerns about rapid expansion and the need for experienced guidance." Jake walked to his podium, but he didn't sit down. Instead, he stood behind it with his hands clasped behind his back. This was not the posture of someone about to make an apology or ask for help. This was the posture of someone about to deliver bad news. "Before I respond to your proposal," Jake said, "I'd like to share some information that might interest this council." Without asking permission, Jake activated the holographic display system above the council table. The aliens looked surprised. Usually Jake asked politely before using any equipment. He always waited for permission. Now he was acting like he owned the place. The hologram flickered to life and showed a detailed star map of the local galaxy. But this wasn't the simple map they had seen earlier. This map showed incredible detail. Ship positions, supply routes, communication networks, and military installations were all marked with precise coordinates. The alien delegates began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. This map showed things that should have been secret. It showed information that individual species kept classified from other council members. How did the humans know so much? "Commander Thornscale," Jake said, pointing to a cluster of red dots on the map. These are the positions of your defensive fleet movements over the past 90 days. Interesting pattern they make, don't you think? The red dots formed a perfect circle around human space. Supply lines connected them through Crics territory. Battle groups were positioned at every major trade route that humans used. It was clearly an invasion formation, not a defensive one. Thornscale's scales darkened with anger. In Zenthari body language, this meant he was either embarrassed or furious. Probably both. "This is an outrageous violation of sovereign space," he growled. "How dare you conduct espionage operations against council members?" Jake laughed. The sound was cold and mechanical, nothing like his old polite chuckles. Several aliens flinched at the sound. They had never heard a human laugh like that before. "Espionage," Jake repeated. "Commander, every signal you've transmitted, every ship you've moved, every private message you thought was secure. We've been watching it all for months. Did you really think the species that developed quantum encryption and faster-than-light communication wouldn't notice your primitive attempts at secrecy?" The chamber erupted in angry voices. Delegates stood up and shouted protests in a dozen different languages. Some accused Jake of lying. Others demanded to know how humans had penetrated their security systems. A few were already reaching for communication devices to contact their home governments. Jake continued speaking over the noise. His voice cut through the chaos like a knife through paper. "For 18 months, humanity has played by your rules. We've attended your meetings, filed your paperwork, and smiled politely while you patronized us like children. We did this because we hoped you might eventually see us as equals instead of amusing pets." He touched the hologram controls and the display zoomed in on a small planet at the edge of Crics space. The planet was marked with a pulsing yellow dot. "We hoped you might treat us with the same respect we showed you. We hoped you might be honest with us the way we were honest with you. But apparently we were wrong about your character." The chamber gradually fell silent as Jake continued. Even the angriest delegates stopped shouting to listen. There was something in the human's voice that demanded attention. Something that suggested very bad things would happen to anyone who kept interrupting. Jake turned to face the Crics delegate, directly. High-voiced Zakth's compound eyes widened as the human stared at him with cold, calculating hatred. "High-voiced Zakth, tell me about the research facility on Kepler 442b. The one where you've been conducting experiments on human prisoners. The one you think we don't know about." The insectoid's body went perfectly still. In Crics biology, this was the equivalent of a human's face going white with shock. His mandibles clicked nervously as he tried to think of something to say. "I don't know what you're talking about," Zakth managed to say. But his voice was different now, higher and more stressed than before. Jake smiled. It was the most terrifying expression any of the aliens had ever seen on a human face. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly what cards his opponent was holding and was about to destroy them anyway. 37 humans have disappeared from outer colonies over the past year. Men, women, and children. Their families were told they died in accidents or got lost in space, but that wasn't true. Was it Hive Voice? The chamber was dead silent. Now, every alien delegate was staring either at Jake or at the Crics representative. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. You've been kidnapping human civilians and taking them to your secret laboratory. You've been running experiments on them, trying to develop biological weapons that will only kill humans, trying to find ways to break human minds and turn us into slaves. Zakth's body language shifted to what humans would recognize as panic. His head darted back and forth looking for support from other delegates, but everyone was staring at him with shock and horror. "This is ridiculous," Zakth said. "I demand proof of these wild accusations." Jake touched the hologram controls again. The display changed to show detailed surveillance footage of the Crics research facility. The images were clear enough to see individual Crics scientists working on equipment, clear enough to see human prisoners in cages, clear enough to see things that no civilized species should ever do to another intelligent being. "We have been watching your facility for 3 weeks, Jake said quietly. "We have recorded everything. Every experiment, every torture session, every murder. The other delegates were backing away from the Crics representative now. Several species had strict laws against biological warfare and experimentation on sentient beings. Being associated with such activities could result in their own species being expelled from galactic civilization. Jake looked around the chamber at all the alien faces. Some looked shocked. Some looked guilty. A few looked scared. None of them looked smug or confident anymore. "So here's what's going to happen," Jake continued. "You're all going to sit down and listen very carefully to what I have to say next, because the age of humans being your polite little junior partners is officially over." The aliens sat down. For the first time since joining the council, a human had given them an order, and they had obeyed it without question. Jake Morrison was no longer pretending to be a diplomat. Now, he was showing them what humans really were underneath all the politeness and patience, and the aliens were beginning to understand that they had made the biggest mistake in galactic history. The silence in the council chamber was complete. Not one alien delegate dared to speak or move. Jake Morrison stood at his podium like a general addressing defeated enemies. The transformation was so complete that it seemed impossible this was the same nervous diplomat who had sat quietly through hundreds of meetings. "You see, delegates," Jake continued, his voice carrying easily through the large chamber, "you made a critical error in your assessment of our species. You confused politeness with weakness. You mistook diplomacy for inability. You assumed that because we chose to speak softly, we didn't carry a big stick." Jake activated the holographic display again. This time, the images that appeared made several aliens gasp with shock. The display showed the true extent of human military capabilities. Hidden shipyards that dwarfed anything the Council had ever seen. Weapons research facilities that could be seen from space. Defensive installations that surrounded every human world like metal forests. The numbers were staggering. Humanity hadn't just been building a few defensive ships. They had been preparing for a war they hoped would never come. The fleet sizes shown on the display were larger than some species' entire populations. Commander Thornscale stared at the images with his mouth hanging open. His yellow eyes darted from one display to another, trying to process what he was seeing. "This is impossible," he whispered. Intelligence reports said humans only had basic defensive capabilities. Intelligence reports? Jake laughed again, and the sound made several delegates flinch. "Commander, your intelligence reports were written by humans. We told you exactly what we wanted you to know. Every piece of information you thought you had stolen from us was actually given to you on purpose." Tide Singer Coralesh's tank began to glow brighter as her stress levels increased. "But why would you hide such capabilities? Why pretend to be weak?" "Because we hoped you would prove worthy of our respect," Jake replied. "We hoped you would treat us as equals if we approached you peacefully. We hoped you would show us the same courtesy we showed you." He touched the controls and the display zoomed in on one particular shipyard. The structure was massive, easily 10 times larger than the biggest Xanthari military facility. Ships were being built there that looked like nothing any alien species had ever seen before. But instead you decided to test us. You decided to see how much you could push the weak humans around. You decided to find out if we would fight back or just roll over and accept whatever you chose to do to us. Jake turned to look directly at high-voiced Zakth. The Crics delegate was shaking now, his compound eyes darting around the chamber looking for an escape route that didn't exist. "Captain Hamilton, please show our guests the footage from Operation Clean Sweep." The holographic display changed to show real-time video footage. It was clearly taken from military cameras attached to soldiers' helmets. The timestamp showed it was only 2 hours old. The footage showed human special forces moving through a Crics research station with terrifying efficiency. The aliens watched in horror as human soldiers demonstrated capabilities that made their own military forces look like children playing with toys. The human soldiers moved like deadly shadows. They appeared and disappeared without warning. Their weapons fired silent bolts of energy that cut through Crics' armor like paper. Their coordination was perfect, like they were sharing thoughts instead of just communicating. The aliens could see Crics guards being eliminated before they even knew humans were in the facility. Security systems that should have been impenetrable were bypassed in seconds. Blast doors that could stop tank rounds were cut open like they were made of cardboard. The rescue operation at Kepler 442b was completed in 12 minutes with 0 human casualties, Jake announced matter-of-factly. All 37 human prisoners have been recovered alive. The facility has been completely sterilized. Several delegates were now openly backing away from their podiums. They were finally beginning to understand the magnitude of their miscalculation. They had thought they were dealing with a species of polite weaklings. Instead, they had awakened something that could end their civilizations without breaking a sweat. All research data has been destroyed, Jake continued. All Crics personnel at the facility have been eliminated. We considered this a proportional response to the torture and murder of human civilians. High-voiced Zacht made a choking sound. In Crics biology, this meant he was experiencing the equivalent of a panic attack. You attacked a sovereign facility. This is an act of war. Jake's smile returned, but it was nothing like his old, diplomatic expression. This smile was predatory and filled with absolute confidence. War? You think this was an act of war? This was us being polite. He gestured to the holographic display, which now showed live feeds from across the galaxy. Human battle fleets were moving into position around every major alien world. Ships that had been invisible just hours ago were now announcing their presence for all to see. This is what human politeness looks like when we're angry, but still trying to be reasonable. Would you like to see what we look like when we stop being polite altogether? The chamber erupted in panicked voices as delegates saw their home system surrounded by human warships. Communication devices beeped urgently as governments across the galaxy received reports of massive human fleet movements. Jake spoke over the chaos without raising his voice. Somehow, his words cut through the noise and reached every alien in the chamber. Here's what's going to happen. The Xanthari will immediately withdraw all military assets from human space. The Crics will provide full reparations to the families of our murdered citizens. This council will formally recognize humanity's right to expand into any unclaimed territory we choose. And if we refuse? Commander Thornscale managed to ask, though his voice was shaking now. Jake's expression became completely calm and peaceful. It was the most terrifying thing any of the aliens had ever seen. When humans looked that peaceful while discussing violence, it meant they had moved beyond anger into something much more dangerous. Then you'll discover why every predator species in Earth's history either learned to coexist with humans or went extinct. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Around the chamber, alien delegates were receiving urgent messages from their home governments. Military commanders were reporting that human fleets had appeared out of nowhere. Defense systems that should have detected approaching ships had seen nothing until the humans chose to reveal themselves. The Granite Kin delegate, a being made of living rock who rarely showed emotion, spoke in a voice like grinding stone. How long have you been watching us? Since the day we joined the council, Jake replied. We have been recording every conversation, monitoring every communication, tracking every ship movement. We know which of you have been planning against us and which of you have simply been too cowardly to speak in our defense. He looked around the chamber one more time, making eye contact with each delegate. Some tried to meet his gaze. Others looked away in shame or fear. The question now is whether you'll give us a reason to keep our polite mode turned off permanently. For the first time in galactic history, the council chamber was completely silent while a human was speaking. No one dared interrupt. No one dared to argue. They all sat quietly and waited to hear what humanity had decided their fate would be. The age of treating humans like junior partners was over. The age of galactic politics as usual had ended. A new age was beginning, and every alien in the chamber knew they would be lucky to survive it. 24 hours later, the galaxy had changed forever. News networks across hundreds of worlds were broadcasting the same shocking reports. Human battle fleets had appeared at strategic points throughout known space. Ships that no one had seen coming were now visible to every telescope and sensor array in the galaxy. The Xanthari High Command was in complete chaos. Admiral Korth Bloodscale stared at the tactical display in his war room with growing horror. His carefully planned encirclement of human space had become a trap for his own forces. The human fleets had positioned themselves perfectly to cut off his ships from each other and from their supply lines. Every Xanthari captain was receiving the same message on a secure channel that somehow wasn't secure anymore. The voice belonged to Admiral Scott Davis, commander of the human fleet. His words were calm and polite, but the meaning was crystal clear. This is Admiral Davis of the Earth Defense Corps. You have 6 hours to begin withdrawal from human space. After that deadline, we will consider your presence an act of war. This is your only warning. Similar messages were being broadcast to Crics fleets, Merhai patrol groups, and the warships of every species that had participated in the conspiracy against humanity. The aliens were discovering that their most secret military positions were known to the humans down to the last detail. On Nexus Prime Station, the council chamber had been in emergency session since dawn. The alien delegates sat around their table like condemned prisoners, waiting for their sentences to be read. Jake Morrison had returned to his usual diplomatic duties, but everything was different now. Where once the aliens had spoken to him with condescending patience, they now listened to every word he said with nervous attention. His polite requests were no longer dismissed as the confused pleadings of a junior species. They were treated as barely concealed orders from a power that could end civilizations before lunch. Commander Thornscale had aged 10 years overnight. His scales had turned a sickly gray color and his yellow eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep. He had spent the entire night on emergency communications with the Xanthari government, trying to find a way out of the trap they had walked into. Ambassador Morrison, Thornscale said, his voice hoarse and defeated. My government has authorized me to begin immediate withdrawal of all Xanthari forces from the disputed sectors. Jake nodded politely. Thank you, Commander. I'm sure Earth appreciates the Xanthari commitment to peace. The words were the same diplomatic language Jake had always used, but now they carried a different weight. Everyone in the chamber understood that Jake wasn't grateful for the withdrawal. He was simply acknowledging that the Xanthari had chosen to obey human orders instead of being destroyed. High voice Zakhth had been silent since the previous day's revelations. His compound eyes were dim and his mandibles hung slack with defeat. The news from Kepler 442b had been even worse than expected. The human special forces hadn't just destroyed the research facility. They had recovered detailed records of every experiment and every Crics official who had been involved. The Crics, collective will pay reparations, Zakhth said quietly. Full compensation to the families of all human victims. We will also provide medical records of the survivors to assist in their recovery. That's very generous, Jake replied in the same polite tone. But everyone knew it wasn't generosity. It was surrender. During the lunch break, Tide singer Coralesh approached Jake privately. Her tank floated beside him as he stood looking out at the stars through a large window. The patterns on her skin were dim and sad. Ambassador Morrison, she said, her musical voice subdued. My people wish to understand something. Why did humanity hide your true nature for so long? Why pretend to be weak when you were so strong? Jake considered the question carefully. For a moment, his old diplomatic demeanor returned. The harsh military commander faded away, and he became the thoughtful negotiator he had been for 3 years. Because we hoped we wouldn't need to show it, Jake said honestly. Humans have learned something from our long history of wars. We learned that the best victory is the one you never have to fight for. We prefer to solve problems through talking and compromise. But you were always ready for war? We were always capable of war, Jake corrected. There's a difference. Being able to destroy your enemies and wanting to destroy them are not the same thing. Coralesh was quiet for several minutes. When she spoke again, her voice was thoughtful. And now, will humans keep their weapons ready? Jake turned to look at her directly. Now you know what we're capable of when our polite mode is turned off. The question is whether you'll give us reasons to keep it off. The afternoon session began with reports from across the galaxy. Xanthari fleets were withdrawing from human space ahead of schedule. Crics officials were being arrested by their own government for conducting illegal experiments. Several minor species were requesting formal apologies for their participation in the conspiracy. But the most important moment came when the Council voted on humanity's original expansion request, the same proposal that had been designed to trap humanity in their current territory was now being rewritten to give humans everything they had asked for and more. The vote was unanimous. Every species that had opposed human expansion 24 hours earlier now voted to support it. They voted quickly and without debate, like people trying to finish an unpleasant task. Jake sat quietly during the vote, taking notes in his neat handwriting. When it was over, he stood up and smiled his old diplomatic smile. But now everyone knew that smile was a choice, not a sign of weakness. "Thank you all for your support," Jake said. "Earth looks forward to continuing our peaceful cooperation with all council members." The word peaceful carried special meaning now. It meant that humans would continue to be polite and diplomatic as long as they were treated with respect. But it also meant that anyone who tried to take advantage of human courtesy would discover what humans were like when they stopped being courteous. As the session ended and delegates began filing out of the chamber, Jake remained at his podium. He was thinking about the future, about human colonies that would now spread across the galaxy, about alien species that would learn to treat humanity as equals instead of amusing pets. The galaxy was beginning to understand that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their military might. It was their ability to choose when to use it. The humans who said please and thank you were the same humans who could end wars in 12 minutes and make entire fleets disappear overnight. The age of humanity being the galaxy's harmless junior partners was over. The age of being treated as equals had begun, and everyone in the galaxy now knew that the polite humans were far more dangerous than any species that relied on threats and aggression. The council session ended with a motion to establish new protocols for interspecies cooperation. The vote was unanimous. Again, some lessons, Jake reflected, only needed to be taught once.